Hello and welcome to the National Orthopaedic Alliance webinar series. And today we're talking about women in orthopaedic surgery. And I want to welcome our panel, Deborah Eastwood, Orla Hennessy, Caroline Hing, Joanna Thomas. And this is sort of following on from a NOA meeting back in October when we had a similar theme and some surprising stuff came up during that. So I thought it'd be useful to have some key people in the room. And thank you all panelists for joining us. Just to say, usual rules, all the participants are on mute. They will have the ability of asking questions. If there's any issues about communication, please use the chat function. And we've got various people behind the scenes helping us out. Thank you in advance to those. We've got Claire and we've Fallon and we have Anne Hoey in the background to help us out. It's only a few weeks since our last webinar, so there's not been an awful lot of news except this on Twitter this morning, which is a bit scary. It's just about maintaining services in the NHS over the next few weeks, that we may have to, in inverted commas, depart from established procedures. This is the terminology they used when they took nurses out of theatre and sent them into intensive care during the pandemic. A lot of concern really at what's going to happen over the next few weeks, just with the NHS and providing a safe service to our patients. It's tough times ahead of us. So at the annual conferences, apologies for the way this slide translated. We had Joe was here with us then, and there was various other speakers, including Tony Clayson, Cheryl Malley, and Sophie Howells. And we had a very, very good talk about things. And there was a little scary moment when we realized we have 3 female orthopedic surgeons in Oswestry, and in Birmingham at the Royal Orthopaedic, there is none I know of at the moment. And that was information was presented us to by Joe Williams, the chief exec, which was a surprise to me. But then we went through a few of the slides, and trauma and orthopedics is way down the hit list in surgery. And why that is why we are here today talking about it. And as far as the trainees is concerned, there has been quite a slow increase in trainee numbers, as you can see, but hasn't quite transformed into consultants at the higher level. I'm not quite sure about that, but it seems that there is a leak of women in orthopedic surgery as we progress through the ranks all the way up. And you'll see that on the slide there, whereas we start off relatively well with core surgical trainees. It seems to be a difficult one to convince women that orthopedics is a great career and a great way forward. Some of the perceptions we still hold, I'm afraid. In fact, I tried to convince my relatively newly qualified niece to go into orthopedic surgery. Her response were, no way, because these are the guys we see in the middle of the night time. They're the guys up most, and the perception is that it is too hard for me to do, which was a bit disappointing for me, and she went into medicine. So to discuss all these issues, again, welcome the panel, and we'll kick off at Orla Hennessy. And Orla wrote an absolutely stunning article, which was published in Bone and Joint, A Woman Like Me, about her journey. And I think I'll say no more, except Orla is going to give us a short PowerPoint presentation to introduce the whole subject. So at that stage, I will stop sharing and I'll switch over to Orla. If you can start sharing and start your talk, Orla, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Cormac, and thanks for the lovely introduction and for inviting me to be here today. So I'll just get this into the right mode. So I suppose, as Cormac has just introduced, Orla Hennessy is my name. I'm currently a HST trainee in the Republic of Ireland, in ST4 at the moment. So a little bit about me. I graduated from NUIG in Galway back in 2017, did my internship there as well. So worked there for about 4 years between kind of PGY one equivalent, and then my SHO years on the CST. And then at the moment now I'm working in Our Lady's Children's Hospital in Crumlin, doing my paediatric rotation. And I'll stop boring you about myself there. So why am I here today? I suppose like in an existential sense of things, why are any of us here? But the reason I suppose Cormac asked me to speak today was because of this article that I wrote around the time that I was applying for HST back in 2021. And looking at basically where were all the women in orthopaedics, and particularly within the Irish system, I suppose our numbers are similarly low, and that there's approximately, I suppose, about a 7% female ratio at the moment on our HST, although I think it has risen as of the most recent intake. So why did I write that article? Well, I suppose as Cormac has highlighted, about 50% of our medical graduates and about 40% of general surgical residents are now female, but internationally orthopaedics just hasn't seemed to have kept up with the increase in medical students and women that are interested in surgery. And there's a lot of articles talking about, I suppose, why those reasons are, and a lot of those come down to things like, quality of life, planning families, maternity leave, difficult work environments. And you can read through all of the excellent articles that are out there on this topic. But one thing that struck me, I suppose, when I went back looking at these articles and looking at all the different reasons, is that often the solution that was proposed was that we need more women in orthopaedics to encourage women to go into orthopaedics, which to me I thought was a bit of a moot point, because it's essentially propagating this cycle of not having enough women to encourage more women to do it. So I kind of started thinking about why that was, and if there were any potential ways around it or potential solutions to it. And that was kind of the basis of the article that I wrote. I suppose a couple of the things that I focused on in that article that Cormac was speaking about is that, first of all, the role models don't necessarily have to be gender exclusive. And there's no reason, I suppose, that young women coming through orthopaedics can't have very good role models in, male consultants, if it's a case that the departments that they're working in don't necessarily have a female consultant. And I suppose what I was looking at was reinforcing this concept that you don't have to have a female role model to believe that you're able to do something. It was very much trying to encourage people in that direction. I know when I originally became interested in orthopaedics, the department that I worked in as a medical student had no female consultants at the time, and there weren't any female trainees when I initially started there. But it was very encouraging male senior trainees and consultants who kind of brought me to theatre and brought me along, that got me really interested in it and kept me interested in it. The other thing that I kind of focused on in the article is that essentially at the end of the day, everyone does have certain biases, and we're all to a certain level biased against ourselves, and we have biased views and perceptions about what an orthopaedic surgeon is and what we expect women to be able to and not to be able to do. Recent studies carried out by the UN found that about 90% of people have an unconscious level of gender bias, and that's including women towards other women, whether or not we're necessarily aware of it. And it's been frequently shown throughout the literature that progressive women in science, technology, engineering and mathematics fields within leadership positions actually tend to themselves subconsciously favour male applicants, which I just thought was another interesting thing going through the literature. And interestingly enough, women who research gender studies have come out and said that they have actually had disappointing scores on implicit association testing, which is essentially a measure of your own cognitive biases. But I suppose eventually it comes back to this concept that unfortunately most of us do hold a certain level of bias, and that bias comes out in a number of ways, in that it comes out in, as women, I suppose, it comes out in our own perception of what we are and aren't able to do. And a lot of medical students coming through, depending on where they've worked and who they've worked with, have this concept of the fact that orthopaedics is for men, and it's for, I suppose, classically the large rugby playing male would have been the initial associations. So the point of my article, I suppose, is hopefully challenging people to think past the biases that I suppose we all have on a certain level towards this. And on some level, another thing that I explored was that we often have that bias on a subconscious level, in that even though we are sometimes in the fortunate position that we are working with other women or have junior or senior colleagues who are interested in orthopaedics, I felt myself coming through training that I'm often more competitive or feel a bit more threatened by other women within the specialty as opposed to necessarily my male colleagues. And the more I thought about this and the more I went back through the literature, from my point of view, I felt that a lot of that potentially came down to tokenism, which is a concept that I explore a little bit in the article, and overall I feel is a very dangerous one, both from a personal perspective and for women entering any specialty that's male dominated. And often the problem is that people tend to have this concept that there are, especially I suppose as we push towards more diverse societies, that there has to be, you know, a woman on a panel, or that you have to appoint a woman to a job. And even when that isn't necessarily true. So I know that the application process for HST, both in the Ireland and the UK, is extremely rigorous. Cormac had those slides earlier showing us the fact that, you know, women score equally as well at men, and potentially sometimes better at the HST interview level. But I know myself, back when I was interviewing, a male consultant that I was working with at the time said the words to me that, well, you know, they have to let one woman on. And that kind of thinking is dangerous from a number of points of view, because first of all, it makes you feel like you're not actually competing with the other men at all. You're just competing with the other women who may or may not be applying. And in the event that you do potentially get that appointment, there's always that, even if you know yourself that you've maybe potentially deserved it, it's always feeding that insecurity in the back of your mind that maybe you're only there because there was a quota or something. And even though you might know on a logical level that it's probably not true, there's also that perception of it within the wider community, because people will say it. So that was another point that I was keen to highlight in the article, because I think that it's only about recognizing these things and talking about them and having them out in the open that we can really start to confront them. So I'm just going to end really on this slide. And I think that this is one thing that makes it very difficult a lot of the time to talk about these issues, because feminism has become such a dirty word to a certain extent, and it's almost become taboo. And it becomes linked into this fear of not wanting to be that person who's out there pushing, you know, women's issues in quotation marks. But essentially, at the end of the day, this isn't necessarily a woman's issue. It's an issue for everyone, because it's about quality of life across the board. It's about improving working conditions for all trainees to make orthopaedics a more attractive specialty to anyone who is interested in doing it. But it's also about having that representation within orthopaedics, having people who are happy to be role models and to be visible, but also treading that fine line of being aware of the fact that there is that unconscious bias out there against, you know, necessarily being very strongly pro-women to a certain extent, when all you're really trying to do is to stand up and let younger women coming through know that, hey, there are actually a few of us here, and this is a reasonable and a good career choice. And on that, I will probably just hand it over to a general discussion, and I'm happy to take any other questions.
That was great, Orla. Thank you very much. There's a lot more good stuff in the article, which I think I've sent to everybody. But a few things hit me about the article was the perception that I'm competing against my female colleagues more than I'm competing against my male colleagues. So I thought that was very interesting. So just to join the discussion, I'm going to welcome Deborah Eastwood, that needs no introduction really. She's a consultant down Stanmore and also the current president of the British Orthopaedic Association. And I put on the title, Deborah, the BOA attitude to women in orthopedics, but obviously I'm very interested, and we're all are, in your journey and how you perceive things are going at the moment. So welcome, Deborah.
Thanks very much, Cormac, and it's a pleasure and an honour to be addressing you today. And I was delighted to see Orla on the panel, as I was involved in judging her essay. So I'm glad that we picked the right essay winner. It's a very good essay. So I think I might start a little bit like Orla and say, you know, where did I come from, if you like? And certainly I never thought that I would have been a surgeon, let alone an orthopaedic surgeon, but I worked in nice units for nice bosses, and I thoroughly enjoyed the job. And so with my appointment as a consultant orthopaedic surgeon, that meant that 4% of women, 4% of surgeons in general were women at that time. It was a figure that meant nothing to me at the time. I didn't even know about it at the time. I was just pursuing the career that I enjoyed, and I didn't perceive that I was having any more difficulty than anyone else. We were just the trainees, the registrars, the senior registrars, and then we all became consultants. And of course, in the world of paediatric orthopaedics, which I specialized in over the first few years, I then found that I was not necessarily surrounded, but there were certainly female colleagues all around. It was really only when I came back to do more work for the BOA that I realized that maybe I'd been living in a little fishbowl and seeing things through a very blinkered perspective. And you've heard the figures from Cormac, and we all know that trauma and orthopedics is the worst of the worst. And although 13% of consultant surgeons are women in orthopedics, it is now up to 7.8%. There is an incremental increase every year, and now over 200. There are 216 female trauma and orthopedic surgeons in the UK. Perhaps most reassuringly, if you like, is that 19% of consultant appointments last year went to women. So that's virtually 20% of consultant appointments were women. So we are changing the playing field, and we are increasing in numbers if you're looking at just the presence of female consultants as a measure of diversity. In our trainees overall, this year's data suggests that 25% of all orthopedic and trauma trainees are women. And last year's level 1 intake, we hit that magical 30% where diversity becomes embedded in the process. So I think things are changing, and they are changing for the better, but they are slow, and it is going to take a while until we can improve that 7% to even 10%. It's going to take a while, but we are getting there. And I think we should look at the number of registrars as a measure of our success rather than the number of consultants at the moment, because I don't feel that there is any evidence at the moment that we are losing trainees who are on the registrar pathway, that we're losing them at consultant level, but we are investigating that. So on behalf of the BOA, when I joined the executive, it was a little bit one-dimensional. And I think we, as the BOA, have provided several important aspects to improve the culture in trauma and orthopedics over the last few years. We came out with a policy document and a strategy document as to how we were going to address diversity within trauma and orthopedics. There were 5 major points that we felt we were accountable to our membership that we needed to improve on. And very simplistically, we have improved on things like having more female speakers, having more female representation on our panels, at the congresses, not only of the BOA, but all the subspecialist association meetings as well. And we've done that with a carrot rather than a stick protocol. And it seems to be working well. I'm not saying we haven't got a long way to go, but it is looking better than it was. The following year, the BOA came up with some documents for trainees, but as importantly for trainers as well, to look at parental leave and to encourage flexibility in training. And this came about at the same time as the College of Surgeons brought out their support program. So supported programs for the return to training, be it after maternity leave or after parental leave or after research or ill health or whatever. So I think the parental leave documents were leaders in their field for a while to encourage our colleagues to consider flexible arrangements for training for our male trainees and our female trainees. The following year, so that's 2 years, 2021, and then in 2022, we had the Culture and Diversity Champions between BOTA and the BOA. And these have encouraged much more joined up thinking in each of the regions between the trainees and the consultant bodies to really ensure that diversity in all its aspects is at the fore of all the training committee meetings. It's at the fore of the ARCP meetings. In everything we do, this idea of diversity and equality and inclusion is being espoused at all levels. And I think that's working well. And there are specific projects that we're doing as well. And then most recently, we've been involved in looking at differential attainment to try and make sure that we have the facts to counteract some of the social media and gossip that says that we are losing so many women at every stage. I agree, we lose, if you want to use that phrase, because 50% of medical students, 60% are women, and certainly 60% of surgical trainees are not women. But I don't think we are losing them. We are just maybe, they're not all realizing what a great career we've had. I'm much more interested at the moment, as a first step, in trying to work out with our culture and diversity champions, with the chairman of the SAC, and we've got a new one now with Deepa Bose. We've got to work out what the evidence is for how people perform at the ARCPs, how they perform at their final exit exams, and then, yes, what happens to them after that. So does a female trainee who gets her FRCS T and O, does she really then not get a consultant job at all? Does she choose to go for a part-time flexible working arrangement, or does she go and work in medical journalism or some other allied field? So we need to have some facts so that we know what we're dealing with, and then we can work out some ideas on how to change things. So I think over the last few years, what I've been pleased to see is that there's much more dialogue between the BOA and our membership, not only in the gender diversity, but in actually all aspects of diversity. And it's very important that if we consider it a door that we have pushing open in terms of encouraging female into the profession, then as we go through that open door, we must bring everyone with us. And that would include all the other underrepresented groups within trauma and orthopedics. And as we realize that there is much more diversity around us, we do need to understand that for some, that might be quite a threatening change. And we maybe have to acknowledge that, as Orla said. I grew up living and working in a male-dominated specialty, and I was lucky and I functioned well. But now to find that you're surrounded by more women, I'm not saying it's threatening, but it is different. And I just wonder, when I hear some of the horror stories around at the moment about the difficulties that some trainees have in their training, I am horrified by that, as we all are. And I wonder if that's because when somehow we are actually not as inclusive as we should be in this changing world. And when we look at the workforce and see how it's different from what we imagined it to be or what it was 10 years ago, then that is maybe not threatening or upsetting, but it's different. And we have to embrace those differences and find ways to make sure that we're all happy in this new workplace. So I think that's all I'm really going to say at the moment. I think the measure of our success in the BOA with our strategies is also seen within our executive lineup and our committee chairs and our council. We are much more diverse. And not only are we diverse, but the people that we have selected or have applied and been appointed in our committee structures are all engaged as well. Because there's no point having a diverse group of individuals who aren't engaged with the process of delivering culture change. So I think that the BOA, I'm proud to be its president at the moment. I don't think we've got it all sorted, but I think that we are making steady progress over a variety of issues which are allowing trauma and orthopedics to be a much more female-friendly profession. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Claire in the background, can you stick my video back on, and perhaps to put up the video of the panelists, please? Thank you. One of the interesting things is this rumor that, the orthopedics, we are getting the core trainees into orthopedics, but we are, as you said, losing them. But looking for the evidence of that is interesting, and discussing facts rather than rumors would be a bit more useful. And you got a feeling that who is spreading these rumors? As you say, there are people out there who have problems with women in surgery and in various other specialties. So there is a leakage of rumor that needs to be quelled, and I absolutely agree. We really need the facts. So thank you for that, Deborah. I'm going to go to Caroline Hing. Caroline, I met Caroline at BOA, which is a big sign of the BOA, Women in Orthopaedics. Actually, it was a Smith and Nephew stand. So I went along out of curiosity, and I met Caroline and one of her colleagues, and we had some discussion about the whole thing. But I thought it was fascinating that there is thought about women don't go into orthopedics as some of the kit is a bit heavy and not designed well, and designed by men for men, and let's work on that. So that whole concept was a bit fascinating for me. But no, I invited Caroline to come and join us and just share your thoughts, Caroline, on where you are and what needs to be done and what could we do differently. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you. So I think I was asked to just give a little bit of background on my career progression, and I came across a great quote from Winston Churchill, which says, "Success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm," which I think neatly sums up my career path. So I think as women, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves that we need to be better than the men in the room to fit in, and that can at times put an awful lot of pressure on you. And my approach was very much that I'm never going to fit in because I don't look the same as everybody else, so why not celebrate it? And as I progressed through my career, I realised that failure is certainly a part of your career pathway, as it is in life, and that we should just accept that as part of it, and that we can't be a success at everything at the same time. And I think that's particularly pertinent to women who have families and are juggling lots of other commitments. And often as we get older, we're also looking after elderly relatives, and everybody has pressures within their life at different points within their career path. So maybe we just need to be a little bit kinder to ourselves and accept that we're not going to pass our exams all at the first time or get that perfect job every time we apply for something. And I think that would explain my career path, which has been through unsuccessful job interviews, failing exams, and still managing to get where I want to eventually. Might take me a little bit longer than everybody else. So when it comes to trying to motivate women to join me in a career in orthopaedics, I do very much say that you do need to be pragmatic, and you can't have everything all at the same time, and at different points in your life different things are important. I think it's really encouraging that now there are so many undergraduates who are female, and it's important to attract them into the career. I take part in an AO UK undergraduate medical school session, and we found for the first time at our most recent course that over 50% of the attendees were female. So I'm very much hoping that, having had a go on dry bones with all of the equipment, they'll realise what great fun it is and want to go into the profession. So I think part of it, as Deborah has said, is attracting the right people to the job, but then also mentoring and supporting them throughout their early years and making sure they make it all the way through and out the other end as a consultant. And that may well be with taking time out or failing exams, or taking longer, and that is just as an acceptable part of life. Now with our pensions and retirement, it may be that we work till we're 67 or leave the profession early, but we need to look after everybody's mental health and make sure that people don't burn out, and just accept people do have lives outside of orthopaedics. And it's been really encouraging to be part of the BOA and see so many changes addressing workplace wellbeing, such as return to work programs, advice on what to do with maternity and paternity leave, supporting colleagues in difficulty, looking after those who may be burning out, and thinking as well as the surgeon as they get older, so how the menopause might affect female surgeons, and looking towards retirement planning as well. So I think the BOA has recognised that a surgeon isn't just somebody who works, and that we need to appreciate the whole person and support them throughout their careers. I think probably it's easier if I answer any questions that anybody might have. As I said, I don't want to paint it as a completely rosy picture that you have to be in the top 10% and pass everything first time. And I think a much more pragmatic approach and appreciating that you might fail as you go along the path won't necessarily mean that you're not successful at the end of it.
Thank you very much for that, Caroline.
Thank you.
So many points. I think what we'll do is, we'll go on to Joanna, and then after that, we can talk about some questions, because we may have actually questions to each other, as well as questions questions from the audience. So thank you again for that. So next I want to welcome Joanna Thomas. There is some feedback from somewhere, and I'm not sure if you could mute. That's better. Thank you. So Joanna was involved in the National Orthopaedic Alliance webinar, and again was very insightful in her comments and precipitated some discussion. So Joanna works in the Birmingham hospitals, and more recently, I believe, is Associate Medical Director of the Woodlands. So welcome, Joanna. If you'd like to join the discussion, please. Thank you. Have we got Joanna on board, Claire?
Hello.
Yes, we have. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Well
Thank
done.
you very much. Oh, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. So I was asked to talk about making it happen for core trainees. And as people have already discussed, when you look at the gender ratios from medical students to foundation year, and then at core surgical trainee, we're at 42% women, 58% men. And as it already been discussed, it drops off quite dramatically into ST training. So it's been almost 20 years since I was an SHO. So I thought I should probably find out what's going on now. And I've contacted as many core trainees as I could possibly get hold of. And I need to say a huge thank you to them for their incredible generosity and with giving up their time. So it was really interesting. The recurring themes when I asked, were they considering trauma and orthopaedics? And if not, why not? It's a lot centered around the whole concept of you can't be what you can't see. And this comment that, well, there's no female orthopaedic surgeons or ST trainees in our hospital. No, hadn't even thought about it. To sadly, some off-putting comments and banter that they had heard from, in all fairness, it was from all surgical specialties, but they felt that the majority were coming from orthopaedics. And they were along the lines of seniors saying, oh, I've got a revision case, I need to have a male assistant. There was a lot about their perception that you had to defend yourself as a woman. So if you couldn't reduce a fracture in A&E or reduce a dislocated joint, if a female was unable to do it, there was some eye rolling from their seniors, and a male colleague would come down, be it an ST level or a consultant, whereas if a male colleague couldn't do it, it was, oh, well, this patient needs to go to theatre. They felt that there was considerable banter in theatre and in the departments in general that was not overtly sexist or racist, but they felt it wasn't inclusive, and there was a perception that it wasn't family friendly. So they felt that as orthopaedic surgeons, we didn't prioritize families and having children and life outside work, which I struggle with that. And then other concerns are really interesting, and this goes back to Orla's amazing essay. And that's the perception of non-surgeons, so people, and often women as well, on the nursing staff, the administrative staff, scrub staff in theatre. So there's a recurring theme is that there's not a fair division of labour amongst the ward jobs. So in hospitals where core trainees were allocated to either days on theatre in the wards, days on the wards, or days in clinic, the female core trainees felt that all the ward jobs had been saved up for them. So when the days they were on the wards, they had mountains of non-urgent paperwork to do, whereas for them, their male equivalents, they just had to do the TTAs and the ward round, and then they could get down to theatre, because there was an expectation amongst both male and female nursing staff that male surgical trainees were surgeons and had to go to theatre, whereas the female surgical trainees, there wasn't that expectation. There was one fairly prominent comment that again was echoed, that if the rota coordinator was an administrative member of staff, their perception was that the female core trainees didn't need to go to theatre. And in actual fact, one female core trainee had sort of audited all her time she was allowed into theatre compared with 2 non-training grades at her level, and the male non-training grades got double the theatre allocation. And she had raised it. She'd raised it in emails with the administrative member of staff, with her training programme director, but it just wasn't being addressed. And I think it kind of all builds up a picture, and I guess that the woke frame word is microaggressions, but it's almost like death by 1,000 cuts. And that when you get repeated experiences at the core trainee level where they just don't feel that they're welcome, when they go to theatres and they don't have the correct hats, when boxes of hats are labelled surgeons' hats or nurses' caps, depending on whether they're more suitable for women with longer hair with the elasticated backs or the tie back caps. For men, if you have a female consultant in other departments and other trusts, or a female surgeon, it was always still often recorded as Mr. So-and-so, despite the gender of that surgeon being female. The fact that when you have conversations about surgeons, the implied gender is a male, even if that's not the case. But these constant microaggressions build into a paradigm where our female core trainees perceive that they are not welcome in a particular environment. And then that affects the way they show up to work, their joy, that real excitement you get when you do your first case as an SHO and you do a DHS skin to skin. They were missing it. And it has sort of seeped away, which I think is really sad. So it brings us on to what can we do? And so I was also asking them, what's great about orthopaedics? What makes you want to be an orthopaedic surgeon? And a lot of them, it was allies and role models who'd taken them seriously as surgeons and giving them that exposure. And these were male surgeons, male consultants and female consultants. So I think that's a really important take-home message, that we have a duty as surgeons, whatever our gender, male or female, to be welcoming for our female core trainees as we would for all of them, and as I'm sure the majority of us are, and just to make sure they feel included. But being aware of the difficulties they face, and it's a fairly well reported fact now that 75% of the unpaid care work is performed by women, whether it's elderly relatives at the end, as you get older, or younger generations. But just having an appreciation for that.
Oh, hi. I think we may have lost Joanna. We'll see if she...
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh,
fine, it's fine. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. But I think we have a duty to help all core trainees with all protected characteristics feel welcome. And it's hard if we're tired, if we're overworked, if we're being pulled in different directions. But I think education is key. I always think pretty much everything comes down to education, but we need to be educating our consultant colleagues, educating the staff on the wards, the nursing staff, wards and theatre, the administrative staff, the admin staff, to really make sure we include other people. And surgeons are seen as surgeons, whatever their gender. And I think it was optimistic. I think we've got a long way to go, but there's some amazing male role models and female models out there. And I think all the work Debbie's doing with the BOA is fantastic. And it's just great that this is at least being talked about and identified, because I think that's the biggest hurdle. Now we know that this perception exists, we can address it and change it. That's pretty much all I had to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joanna. There's a lot in there. We lost you momentarily. We had a little minor crash towards the end of that for about 30 seconds, but thanks for your contribution. I'm just going to kick off on the discussion, because one of the things that happened in the NOA is that we talked about having understanding partners. If you're going to chase a career in surgery, especially orthopedics, for me, it was really having a wife who actually basically gave up her career to take after the kids and said, well, you're going to be number one career. And I always thought about, well, what if the shoe was on the other foot and my wife came up to me and asked me to compromise on my career to facilitate her career. So understanding partners, I'm just going to throw it out there, because I think at the NOA somebody said, it may have been you, Joanna, my understanding partner is another orthopedic surgeon. Was it you, Joanna?
Yeah.
It was, okay. So that does help, having a partner as an orthopedic surgeon, because they realize what it's all about. But maybe to the rest of the panel, just about the whole society change that we need, not only getting rid of microaggression, but having support at home for a career like orthopedic surgery. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. Maybe Debbie, do you want to have any comments?
Well, I always comment about anything, really, even if I'm not qualified to do so. But so I think we are in a different world now, and I think we do expect support from our friends and our family and our colleagues. But I don't think it has to be a supportive sort of wife or husband or partner at home. I think it just needs to be a much more supportive environment. And I think we need to be much more flexible in how we address our working weeks. We have to be more flexible in how we do our training. COVID's taught us that. We can do some of it online rather than in person. We need to be much better at allowing flexibility of where you're working. It is ridiculous to have two people trying to pursue careers in different areas of London, let alone different areas of the country. So there's a lot of that sort of supportive network and flexibility and outlook that we need to encourage, as much as having a supportive partner at home, or a dog, or a cat, or a goldfish. I'm sure all of them can be.
Thanks for that. On that point, Caroline or Orla, do you want to comment on that? What might you need at home, or is that
I think it's true to say, I was going to say that probably if you looked at an orthopaedic department 20 years ago, the majority of the department would be male with partners at home who didn't work. Whereas if you look at departments now, most of the younger male consultants have female partners who are working as well. And it might not be in a surgical career, but they are having to juggle the fact that there are two partners working. So I think we're all a lot more tolerant with having to juggle on-calls and trauma weeks, holidays and commitments within our own departments, whether you're male or female. And as Deborah said, that's all about being in a supportive atmosphere, and recognising that everyone now has a career in order to afford to pay taxes and support themselves.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree that most of my colleagues have their wives and husbands have other professional careers. So that's a big discussion at home as to who picks up the kids at 3 o'clock, etc. I'm just going to move on to some of the questions, if that's okay, unless Orla has anything particular to say at this stage.
I suppose just from my point of view, coming through at the moment, coming through maybe a slightly different economic climate. Like I have my partner is also working in medicine. He's incredibly supportive and has always been very supportive of the fact that, you know, down the line there will be hopefully children to be taken care of and that, and taking a big role in that. But we're also in the situation whereby, you know, we're coming through like a property crisis, a rental crisis, cost of living is rising, and we're probably not in a position at the moment where we would be able to, I suppose, afford a single income or part-time income household, which is just another thing, I suppose, potentially to consider. And I'm sure a lot of your trainees living in London and that would probably have a similar sentiment. I know certainly like Dublin, Galway, like cost of living and having that luxury of having a partner who wouldn't have to work is maybe something that's becoming more difficult as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a very good point. Times are changing, economics are changing. So we'll just go on to some of the questions I had. Some of these are to, well, this is one to the Orla, but the panel. Question for Orla. It's from Tony Clayson, who was actually involved in our NOA webinar. At a recent BOA meeting, some younger consultants expressed views that comments made to them sometimes felt like feminist movement rather than constructive. What advice would Orla and panel give to female colleagues taking this required culture change forward, and to male colleagues who might find their own unconscious biases cause them to feel that way? It's an interesting question. Anybody want to pick up on that one? Orla.
I suppose my initial reaction to that, I'm not sure what he means by felt like a feminist movement, and that maybe they felt that people were just trying to appear outwardly supportive. I think my advice to, I suppose, male colleagues who are wanting to be a mentor and give advice to women coming through is that it's really important to, you know, be there as a mentor, give advice on their career, not to be overly prescriptive, particularly on issues that are women's issues. Like I have had people advise me very particularly on my fertility, which is not always necessarily the conversation that you want to have, and is never a conversation that you would necessarily have with the male trainee. And I know that like a lot of the time it's coming from people who are trying to be in a helpful position, but ultimately a lot of it comes down to, you know, treat your female trainees the same way you would treat your male trainees, you know, give them the same advice, because it's all applicable. And I find a lot of the time when I get into those, like, you know, career and life talks with consultants who are offering me advice, it very quickly comes around to, well, have you thought about, you know, when you're going to have the kids and babies? And if you think your female trainee hasn't thought about that, they almost definitely have, and it's almost definitely something they think about, you know, very regularly. So that would probably be maybe a bit of advice that I would have on that front.
Thank you. Any other comments on that? If there's not, I'll go on to question number 2. Yes.
Just one thing, I think it is a huge culture change, and we all have a duty to be kind. And I think that's echoing what Caroline says. But often people can make comments without truly thinking about their impact. So I think they should be called out, but in a kind way. I tend to do it through humour, but I think we should not let things go, but try and bring everyone in our departments and our wider members of staff along with us. Yeah.
I think the comments about mentors, like for anybody, a strong mentor is really really drives you forward and gives you encouragement. And male or female, latching onto a strong mentor. And I think the point's been made, it doesn't have to be a female mentor. And some of the best mentors can be men in your local environment. So picking a good mentor, male or female, is important. Thank you for that. I'll go on to the next question, if that's okay. Question to panel. How would you sell orthopaedics to your daughter if she was expressing an interest? Okay, that's a good one. Who will we go to this time? Caroline, maybe? Will we start you, Caroline? Maybe? Will we start you, Caroline?
So I would sell it as try before you buy. Come and have a go. So the best bits are not the clinic and the admin, they're the actual operating. Go and do one of the workshops. So AO UK run undergraduate workshops. I think we did one in Ireland a couple of years ago. They're in Birmingham, Leeds, up in Edinburgh as well. There are lots of other workshops which informally spring up around the region, especially if you look on Twitter. ASSET is a great resource, the Association for Surgeons in Training. There's also undergraduate and trainee allied societies with BOA, which are BOMSA and BOTA, and they're excellent for just coming and having a go. And that's when you're going to find out whether it's something you love or not. If you like tinkering with hammers and you like crafty things, then you'll love orthopaedics.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any comments on that one? Deborah?
I would say that absolutely, above all, you make people better. And that's a really life-changing, quality of life-changing event. And I agree that it's very good fun fixing things, Caroline, and you know I love fixing things. But I do think that if you can get the right people into the right clinic at the right time to show them people getting better from a fracture or now walking, well, you see, we're not allowed to follow our patients up anymore, are we? But to see someone walking pain-free after a hip replacement, that is just a phenomenal feel-good factor for the patient, but also feel-good factor for the surgeon. And I think sometimes we say, oh, you feel that we shouldn't actually say that it makes us feel good, but it's nice to do a job that you think works, and orthopedics and trauma surgery works. And I think it's a very easy sell as long as you get people in the room.
Thank you. Any other comments on that one? I must say, I went into orthopedics because again, in a clinic, I said, this is a quick win. Broken bone, plates and screws together, bone heals, win-win situation. And I really still believe in that, except for spinal surgery, but we won't go there. Okay, I'll go on to the next question. Any of the panel regret any aspects of their career path? Anybody want to go with that one to start with? Any bits of the career path that I wish I'd done it slightly differently?
So I'll come in on that one, only in such as I don't really have any real regrets, but I think that I do regret not realizing earlier that trauma and orthopedics wasn't as diverse as I think it should have been. So because pediatric orthopedics was, I got lost in that little bubble. And I think people of my generation, which is a little bit older than Joe and Caroline, we could have done a little bit more, a little bit sooner, to make it a more level playing field and to be more inclusive. So that I regret. So I just mean that now that the current trainees and younger consultants coming up, they will find something that maybe in retrospect, and hopefully not too much retrospect, that they could have been involved in a little bit more. And that's why I think I'm asking on behalf of the BOA that we have people engaged in the processes with the BOA, so that we don't miss a trick and we don't sort of wait too long before we bring about some culture change. So I think that would be my regret stroke advice: be involved from an early stage. And I know we're all busy, but a little bit of involvement, and you can, put your 2 penneth worth in and then come out again if you really haven't got the extra time at the moment.
Yeah. Any other comments on that one? So any regrets in your career path? I thought it was interesting, I don't know who mentioned it, that the understanding that your career path may be long or short or somewhere in between, for various different reasons, including childcare. I think that goes for the partners as well, that an understanding that you may have to take prolonged paternal leave, blah, blah, blah. But again, I think that culture is changing very rapidly, not only in orthopedic surgery, but across the board. Deepak Bose is joined us, which is good. It is really the partners who are the limitation for women in surgery. Wow, okay, that's a statement. Does everybody agree with that?
I know.
Not so sure, but okay, go for it, Joanna.
The partners are the limitation. Oh, I think that's brilliant. I think,
to be fair to Deepa, she said rarely, not
rarely.
Really,
okay, rarely. Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, right, we'll go through this one quickly. Anonymous attendee, I'm hearing a lot about the importance of having a good mentor. What does a good mentor look like? Generic question, a good mentor. Well, sorry, my good mentor was he was a pediatric surgeon. It looked like Santa Claus, and he had a brilliant attitude with kids. And he made me laugh in outpatients, and he was technically brilliant. And that was my good mentor, but he did seem to have an ear for the more junior people in the room. And that's my idea of a good mentor, not only talking to the senior registrar, but involving everybody in the room for what it's worth. Anybody else want to comment on what their good mentor looks like or looked like? Maybe Orla, do you want to talk about mentoring and who's your mentor? You can share us a little bit about who inspired you.
So I suppose my original mentor, going back to when I was a medical student, would have been Mr. Colin Murphy. He was an orthopaedic surgeon in Galway University Hospital, still is, don't know why I said was. He's still there. He's an arthroplasty surgeon, and he very much, from when we got involved, like on our kind of general medical school rotation, was like, you know, come to theatre, see cases, scrub in. And I think it's that person who can share that enthusiasm and share their love for it, kind of similar to your, I suppose, pediatric mentor. It's somebody who shares that with you and also gets you involved in it, because when you're at that stage where you're a medical student or you're an SHO and you're just coming through, it's seeing those things, seeing somebody else really enjoying what they do and getting to feel like you're involved in it, you know, makes such a big difference. I think I remember being like scrubbed for a case with him, and, you know, like he let me put in some staples, and at the time I was like, oh my God, this is the most exciting thing I've ever done. But it's just about getting people involved, sharing your enthusiasm with them, and hopefully some of it sticks.
Okay, thank you for that. Nicola Lowry, what key steps organizations to make orthopedics a more inclusive and welcoming space for women? I think that's maybe locally. So what key steps, is there one or two key steps an organization said, well, we're going to correct this, where will we go? Anybody want to take that one?
Okay, I think so from an organisation point of view, if you appointing women, get more women in the workplace, appoint them, I think helps support, like if you look demographically at genders of what help people, a lot of women in many different positions are said to have problems with imposter syndrome, and I know it's something I struggled with. Having people there to help, have a mentor both in the department and out the department, if you're appointing women to that consultant level or a board level, just recognizing that if for any group really, not just women, if you're appointing someone who is a minority in your organization to any role, give them someone to talk to, give them a mentor, let them know that you hear them, you're available for any concerns, and check in to see how they're doing, so they have the opportunity to feed back.
Thanks for that. Yeah, anybody else want to, any pearls of wisdom about the culture change within an organization besides appointing more women, which I think is the obvious one? What else could we do? I think the mentoring thing is really important because Sorry, Caroline, did you want to join in there?
So I was going to go for some practical solutions. So it's things like having gowns in theatres that fit and lead aprons that fit as well. Having stools so that you can stand on something if you can't see. Even practical things like a scrub cap which fits over a hijab or long hair. So, and those aren't just for female surgeons, that makes women more welcome throughout the theatre complex. So I think rather than saying this is just intervention specifically for female surgeons, it's more about making women feel more comfortable in their workplace, full stop. And I know a lot of trusts are now looking at things like menopause cafes, so it's talked about a lot more well-being generally for the workforce as well, and that all makes a difference to staff sickness and retention of staff. So a happy workplace and a supportive workplace really should be part of strategy, full stop, not specifically for female surgeons.
And do you think anybody think that the emphasis by some companies on making more of the tools presumably lighter to facilitate women in orthopedics and looking at the design, and is that an important factor? That came to me as a slight surprise, because all the tools have dramatically changed in recent years and much lighter than they were. Is that important or not?
I'd probably be annoyed if somebody asked me if I wanted the woman's version of something.
Well, I think I get that, and that's why I was a little bit taken aback by the approach by Smith and Nephew. I'm sure it's all very well and good, but yeah.
I think that I don't know, I suppose the other panelists have obviously been working in operation for a lot longer than I have. I don't think any of my problems within orthopedics or co-trainees problems have been to do with actually being able to do any of it from a physical operating point of view. And I think a lot of the changes that we can make ultimately come back to what our quality of life changes across the board from the point of view of call rotas, maternity leave, and that side of things.
Yeah. And do you think there's any drift? I know that the subspecialties that within orthopedics that women choose, pediatrics, hand and wrist, is the ones that I'm familiar with just locally. Is there a bias in that respect of the subspecialties? Do women believe that, okay, I can do hand and wrist, but I can't do hips and knees? Does anybody get that?
I think that might have been true before, and it was certainly considered appropriate all those years ago that I was going to do hands or kids. I mean, that was considered appropriate. The fact that I really thought revision hip replacement was ghastly business, that was my choice not to do that. So I think that's probably a slightly outdated thinking now. I think there's just about enough everywhere to encourage people into all aspects of orthopedics. I think spines is the one that is lagging behind. As far as the instrument design is, as Deepa said, it's not necessarily the lighter tools, but more for smaller hands. And as I get older, my grip strength has gone completely. So I now have to get the men to do some of the things which need a good grip, and I just haven't got it anymore, which is a disappointment to me. But things change. So I think some of the tools and some of the design work that the Culture and Diversity Champions of BOTA and the BOA are doing, and others led by Caroline and Deepa and many others, I think it's just to use a discussion with the companies as to think about the diversity of surgeons that they're treating, tall and small, and male and female and everything else, and also by having them involved in their design companies, and as Caroline has often said, in their educational panels as well. So it's just a way of engaging with the companies at one level, so that you can then infiltrate all their other processes as well.
Okay. Look, I'm going to close it down there. I'm going to thanks everybody for joining. Thanks the whole panel for joining us. I'm just going to share my screen for one minute on an NOA issue. I think Deepa Bose just made the point. I think you've answered that question about lighter tools. What I was just going to say is that this is I think it is the 23rd webinar we've had now, and our next one is in January. I hope people will join us. I was going to ask if we could put up a poll just before people leave. It'll take about 2 minutes. In the background should be Fallon, who's going to pop the poll up. And I think there's 4 questions. If you could do that, please. Thanks. Is it coming? Claire, have we got a poll there that we can pop up? Yes, we do. Okay, so it's in front of you there. First question. I'm a woman and core trainee considering a career in orthopedic surgery. If yes or no, encouraged that this meeting more women will apply for orthopedic training. Yes, no, or not sure. 3, I feel significant progress has been made over the past 10 years. Yes, no, not sure. And finally, as a woman core trainee, I'm more likely now to apply for orthopedic training. Some of that might be not applicable, obviously, but if you are a core trainee, if you would complete that. And I'm just going to pause for a couple of minutes. So yes, in January, we do have, we're going to talk about virtual wards and whether it's orthopedic. In elective orthopedics, it is a viable option to try and increase our bed base moving forward in our elective recovery. So hope you can all join us then. So the poll is closed and I'm hoping Fallon can press a magic button and just give us some results. Okay. So, right, I am a woman, a core trainee considering career in orthopedics. Unfortunately, does that mean we've had no trainees? That is very disappointing. I thought we spread the word to core trainees, so a lot of this won't be applicable. Encourage this meeting that more women will join orthopedics, so that's a good. So 75% feel that we're going in the right direction. Progress over the last 10 years, half of us say yes, and the other half say not sure. And then finally, as a woman in orthopedics, I'm afraid it's not applicable, but we haven't had any core trainees. That's a bit disappointing because we fired off our webinar invitation to lots of programs. So that's a bit disappointing. We'll try and have the recording, by the way, made available if any of the core trainees wish to look at this. And just on behalf of the NOA, I want to thank everybody here, Joanna, Orla, Debbie and Caroline. Thank you for joining us. I think it was an interesting discussion and the idea is to keep the discussion going. So thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Bye now.
Thank you.